So welcome everybody. My name is Nikki Detta. Welcome to FFAR's Minimizing the Impact of Emerging Disease Threats in Swine Through Research Funding Partnerships. We're really happy that you could join us today. This webinar is a part of FFAR's 10-year anniversary celebration. So as we celebrate 10 years of FFAR, we decided to take a look back at what we've done over the past decade and showcase our vision for the future. We've funded over hundreds of grants, research grants, and worked with over 500 partners in order to steward research across the food and agricultural value chain to advanced agricultural innovation. Throughout this year, we're hosting monthly webinars to highlight FFAR-funded research and highlight the power of collaborative partnership and the collaborative partnership model to advance scientific research. To view previously recorded webinars, a part of this FFAR's 10-year anniversary celebration, you can visit our website at foundationfar.org/impact. This webpage will also feature other content from our 10-year anniversary celebration. So again, thank you for joining us today. We're very happy to have you. To start, I'm going to briefly introduce our agenda. So we're going to have a brief introduction by Dr. Jasmine Bruno of FFAR, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and how we address emerging disease threats through partnership building and research collaboration. Next, we're going to hand it over to our collaborators at the Swine Health Information Center. They're going to introduce themselves and really highlight two of our unique partnership programs that we've throughout this past year. Next, we're pleased to be joined by Mark Schwartz from Schwartz Farms, and he's really going to bring the angle of the swine producer into our conversation today to elevate the impacts and drive home that value add piece that is necessary for us as we collaborate and build these research programs. And then we're going to have a 30-minute panel discussion. So SHIC, FFAR, and Mark Schwartz are going to be talking to us about what they see and the key insights they bring from their lenses in order to really advance public-private partnerships and overall research partnerships in general to advance our swine industry. So a little bit of logistics before I pass it over to Jasmine. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the FFAR events page at the end. Time permitting, our panelists will be able to answer your questions at the end. So please use the chat function to ask your questions, and I'll be reviewing throughout the presentation if we have time, of course. Here are our panelists that I'm so excited to introduce today. So starting with Dr. Jasmine Bruno. Dr. Jasmine Bruno is a scientific program director here at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. She manages our animal production portfolio within FFAR's Cultivating Thriving Production Systems priority area. Prior to joining FFAR, Jasmine worked at the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI, researching systems-appropriate genetics to support food security and livelihoods in sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Bruno received her doctorate in rangeland ecosystems from Colorado State University. Thanks again for joining. Next, we have Dr. Megan Niederwerder, who is currently the executive director at the Swine Health Information Center. Dr. Niederwerder was named executive director earlier this year after her two-year tenure as an associate director at SHIC. She earned her veterinary degree at Kansas State University, and after practicing as a veterinarian, later returned to K-State to obtain her PhD in infectious disease of swine, specifically studying clinical responses of swine to viral diseases. Dr. Niederwerder is a veterinarian scientist with a passion for health and prevention of disease in swine and supporting the U.S. pork industry. Thank you again for joining. Next, we also have Dr. Lisa Becton from the Swine Health Information Center. She's currently the associate director at SHIC and came to SHIC at the beginning of this year, January 2024. She previously held the position of Director of Swine Health at the National Pork Board and served there for over 15 years. Dr. Becton received her DVM degree from North Carolina State University and holds a master's degree in food safety from Michigan State University. Last year, Dr. Becton received the American Association of Swine Veterinaries Technical Services / Allied Industry Veterinary of the Year honor at the association's 54th annual meeting. And this award is given to those that demonstrate and deliver outstanding veterinary service in swine. Thank you again for joining today. And last but certainly not least, we have Mark Schwartz joining us from Schwartz Farms, excuse me. Mark is the Director of Innovation and Production Optimization with Schwartz Farms and currently serves as the President of SHIC's Board of Directors. Mark was raised on a family dairy and crop farm in southern Minnesota after finishing his undergraduate studies in economics and animal science at the University of Minnesota. He joined his brother's pig crop and pig farm, which has grown to the next generation, including 5 nephews, which have now joined the operation. Mark also completed graduate work in veterinary medicine at the University of Minnesota and is a part-time assistant professor in the U of M College of Veterinary Medicine. He resides in Sleepy Eye with his wife, Anita, and has 4 daughters, with the youngest as a senior in high school. Thank you again, Mark. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine to tell us a little bit more, about FFAR. Jasmine?
Excellent. Thank you, Nikki, for that excellent introduction. So I'm going to just give a brief intro to FFAR, and then we'll move into a deeper dive into how our portfolio, which is focused on animal agriculture, partners with entities like SHIC to address emerging disease threats in animal ag. So in terms of FFAR, we were established in 2014 in the Farm Bill, really with this look towards connecting funders, researchers, and farmers together to pioneer the next frontier of ag research. Next slide. Now, our mission, which is really at the heart of what we do, is around building these collaborative partnerships to move forward and support agricultural research to really address the challenges that are facing food and agriculture today. All right, next slide. So what makes FFAR unique, or the FFAR factor, is that we really look to complement the USDA's research agenda. So looking to identify where there are critical knowledge and funding gaps that we can really identify to work on. And we work on those funding gaps in a collaborative approach where we're integrating producers as well as other agricultural stakeholders. And we aim to increase public agriculture research investment. So for every $1 federal dollar that we spend from that initial Farm Bill funds, we have to match that with at least $1 non-federal dollar, amplifying that investment in agriculture. And then we really focus on actionable science. You'll hear a bit more about that today, how we look to fund research that is really going to drive change for producers in the field and for our agricultural and food systems today. Next slide. Okay, so today we're here to talk about partnerships and collaboration. So I'll dig a little bit deeper into FFAR's collaborative approach. So when we go to develop a research program at FFAR, we seek really broad participation from the agricultural community. So we work with entities, for instance, like SHIC, but also producers, industry experts, academics, to help identify and guide us on where there are critical research needs. We bring those stakeholders together, and again, that includes farmers, researchers, scientists, academics, industry experts, through our FFAR convening events and other stakeholder engagement to really, again, collaboratively develop where we have critical research needs that need to be filled. And when we're doing that process of identifying research needs, we are in tandem also establishing collaborative funding models, because again, we need to match every dollar that we spend with a non-federal dollar. And so that approach is how we build programs that are of mutual interest to a really broad range of agriculture stakeholders, and how we're able to also develop our funding models as well. All right, next slide, Nikki. So a bit more about what areas we're interested in supporting and we invest in. So we're here celebrating our 10-year anniversary with all of you. And to kick that off in 2023, we engaged in a relatively robust strategy refresh process where we talked to over 300 stakeholders across agriculture to really understand what are the challenges that they're seeing, the opportunities, research priorities. Where do they think that FFAR can strategically contribute to the needs that we have in the space? And after that work, we have settled on moving forward in the next 10 years with the 4 priority areas of thriving production systems, food systems, vibrant agro ecosystems, and then a strong scientific workforce. And you can see here, we really envision those 4 priority areas as being heavily integrated and interconnected. But what we'll mostly speak on today will be this thriving production systems portfolio, because it's where our animal systems work sits. Next slide, Nikki. So more about that thriving production systems team. We're really committed to looking to support animal and crop systems. So funding research that is gonna have an eye towards increasing productivity, combating pests and diseases, and then supporting animal welfare, all while really safeguarding farmers' livelihoods. So underneath our team, we're looking at 4 key areas that we're looking to support research in, 3 of which I'll speak a bit more on because they touch the animal portfolio. So first is economically viable systems, looking to invest in research where we're designing and assessing resilient production systems that are able to advance producers' profitability. We really understand, and we heard from producers that that profitability element is critical to supporting adoption of technologies and innovations in the field. Then increasing environmental sustainability. This is our commitment to supporting research that will cultivate crop and animal systems that are efficient and that are protecting, as well as in some cases regenerating, natural resources. And then last but not least, the theme that we'll speak on through most of today, our integrated animal health, welfare, and productivity theme. I like to say that this has been a long-standing pillar of the portfolio as we've had long-standing relationships and investments here. But it's our work in improving animal health and welfare while maintaining or increasing productivity. All right, next slide, Nikki. So under that relatively broad umbrella of animal health and welfare, we identified that emerging disease threats are one of the critical gaps that we're looking at that FFAR could fill. And some of the reasoning behind that is partially because of our partnership model, as well as our ability to deploy funds rather rapidly and be agile. So our strategies for addressing emerging disease threats in the sector are collaborating with industry partners to really identify where there are emerging or unanticipated threats in the sector. And I will say this is true to our mission in terms of fostering collaboration. And SHIC has been an invaluable partner in collaboratively working with FFAR and informing us around when there are critical swine health needs. And strategically, we look to do kind of one of 2 strategies: rapidly responding with program, such as through our ROAR programming, understanding that deploying funds quickly is one of the contributions that we can play in the sector to these emerging threats. And then hosting competitive solicitations to identify novel research. And SHIC is going to walk us through a few of the solicitations that we've hosted with them in the swine space. And if we hit all of our targets of deploying those funds quickly, funding novel research, being able to pool funding to support emerging disease threats that are relevant to the sector, our desired outcomes are really a sector that has increased preparedness, improved response, that FFAR's funds that we put into these areas, that they're seeding larger research investments when applicable. And then ultimately, again, it's so critical for us to see our investments turn into action so that we've made available options for producers to enable them to mitigate or prevent emerging disease threats. All right, next slide, Nikki. So that was a really quick look at FFAR, but now we're going to do a deeper dive into some of the collaborative research programs in emerging disease threats in swine that we have co-funded and created with SHIC, the Wean-to-Harvest Biosecurity Program, and the Japanese encephalitis virus program. SHIC has been such a critical partner in identifying these research needs and then working with us to quickly identify research and deploy funds. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues, Doctors Megan Niederwerder and Dr. Lisa Becton.
Thank you so much, Jasmine and Nikki. Again, for the audience, I'm Dr. Megan Niederwerder. I'm the Executive Director of the Swine Health Information Center. And certainly we thank the entire team at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research for their partnership, for the opportunity to discuss the collaborative research programs today, and are certainly grateful for this opportunity from the Swine Health Information Center Board of Directors, U.S. pork producers, our working groups and staff. Just grateful to be on the webinar here today and excited to share some of the collaborative research programs we have. Next slide, please. So the Swine Health Information Center, this organization was launched in 2015 with Pork Checkoff funding by the National Pork Board. And really the organization was created by producers who wanted a center to be focused on evaluating and monitoring the next emerging disease risk. And so the mission of the Swine Health Information Center is really to protect and enhance the health of the U.S. swine herd by minimizing the impact of emerging disease threats. And we do that through various mechanisms, such as a coordinated communication strategy, preparedness activities, looking at both global and domestic disease monitoring, analysis of swine health data, and then using that information to target research investments that will provide the greatest value back to pork producers, again, to protect the health of U.S. swine. Next slide. When we look at the mission and kind of think about how that affects our day-to-day activities, we really understand our ability and our mission is really carried out through monitoring those swine diseases, evaluating and identifying the next emerging risk, and then using that information to inform our activities and our research investments. The overarching umbrella of our organization and the way that we carry out our mission, though, is to look at how we can effectively and efficiently communicate bidirectionally with producers and practitioners. As you think about emerging disease risks, that inherently has a constant state of change. And so we want to have this very effective communication strategy whereby any of the information that the Swine Health Information Center is generating is being shared effectively with producers and practitioners so that they can change their operation as quickly as possible or change their practice based on the information that's been generated by the center. We also, of course, want to hear from the industry. What's the emerging disease risks that are occurring in your practice or in your herd so that we can adjust our activities to address those needs. Next slide. The Swine Health Information Center is really founded on 5 strategic pillars. This has been since the organization's inception in 2015, and we really look at these strategic pillars in how we address our mission, but how we also carry out our plan of work that's created each year. So we think about pillar 1, improving swine health information. How do we effectively communicate any of the disease monitoring or research outcomes with producers and veterinarians? We also look at how we can monitor and mitigate risks to swine health and then respond to emerging diseases as they occur in the field. We also want to look at what are the most novel ways to either detect emerging diseases early or novel sample types, novel diagnostic tests to really discover those as quickly as possible and utilize our swine disease matrices to prioritize swine pathogens and look at allocating our resources to best fulfill those needs. Next slide. When we create our plan of work each year, one of the things that we have in our mind is that we want to be constantly adapting and responsive to industry needs. The structure of SHIC is really set up so that we can receive stakeholder input and adapt our plan of work throughout the year based on those emerging disease risks as they occur. And so we respond to these emerging priorities. Our structure and our board is very supportive of responding to the emerging priorities, allocating dollars and budget resources towards those emerging priorities, and really looking at our plan of work as a guiding principle to our day-to-day activities, but always being willing to respond and be adaptive to those new industry needs. Next slide. One of the examples that has occurred very recently with regards to a partnership between the Swine Health Information Center and FFAR was our research program on Japanese encephalitis virus. We formed that and announced the RFP earlier this year. In February, we had a webinar to announce the RFP and then had proposals due on April 15th of this year. We really received an outstanding response from this, 26 research proposals across 23 different institutions, had those proposals reviewed for during a competitive review process for value to the swine industry, and then are currently in the award process and contracting process, hoping to formally announce those in the coming weeks. Overall, though, there was $1.3 million that was awarded through this program across 6 projects. And those 6 projects, again, will address research needs and priorities to prevent and prepare for Japanese encephalitis virus, of which the US is currently negative. Next slide. As a bit of background, Japanese encephalitis virus is a zoonotic transboundary disease. It is transmitted by the bite of an infected mosquito, and it's maintained in that natural cycle between water birds and Culex mosquitoes, with water birds serving as an amplifying or reservoir host. The disease can then spill over into pigs, horses, and humans. In the swine population, it causes disease in the sow breeding herds, causing abortions, delayed farrowing, stillbirths, and weak piglets, as well as infertility in boars. We really identified this as a potential emerging disease risk to the US swine industry based on an outbreak that occurred in 2022 in Australia, where a new JEV genotype, genotype 4, expanded into new geographic range in areas of Australia and affected over 80 breeding herds. Next slide. Some of the research priorities that were covered by the JEV research program: understanding the competent vectors in the US. How do we reduce and control mosquitoes in and around farm? How do we utilize vaccines in the US for JEV, of which a vaccine is not currently available? How do we look at reducing or mitigating the clinical impact to litters if the sow is infected during gestation? Again, thinking about how we best prevent infection and also prepare for it, as the US is currently negative, but JEV is an emerging disease risk. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Lisa Becton.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you to FFAR again for the opportunity to share with you all what we're working on in our collective programs, because a lot of these research projects would not have been possible in the breadth and scope that they are without the collaboration with FFAR. And so what I'm going to cover today is our Wean-to-Harvest Biosecurity Research Program. And again, this was funded collaboratively with the Swine Health Information Center, Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and the National Pork Board, Pork Checkoff. There was approximately $2.3 million total funds that were contributed between all 3 organizations. And this project initiated in 2022. And in the previous slides, it was shown our collaborative process, how we seek input. During that time of receiving input for priorities, looking at our Wean-to-Harvest Biosecurity, it was a gap that was identified as basically a chink in the armor of our biosecurity and preparedness to protect swine health. Because in the grow-finish population, a lot of what happens there and then going to the plant on the harvest side can have a backflow into our sow farms and really cause significant health challenges. And so this project and process was identified as a significant gap and a need. As we looked at the priorities, it was divided into two main categories. The first was assessing on-site or on-farm biosecurity. What are things that happen in that leg of production that can influence biosecurity and disease introduction? The second component, and no less important, is transportation, because we have to move pigs everywhere, whether they're coming into a site or leaving the site in one manner or the other. And so transportation is a big component of biosecurity for our industry. Overall, we've had, since 2022, we have funded 22 projects to date. And so next slide, please. So our priorities, though, to dive a little bit into those, again, we're looking at both site and transportation biosecurity. And so things that we look at the site, how can we increase biosecurity adoption by the farm workers, but also by a lot of our other partners that have to come into the units? If we can understand what motivates workers to abide by biosecurity or not, then we can help really hone in on our workforce to provide the resources and support that they need, not only to do their job, which can be very grueling, but also to be able to comply with our biosecurity and ensure the swine health within their farms. Other things on site include cost-effective air filtration, essentially looking at how can we have both bio-exclusion of air coming in, but also bio-containment if a site should become positive with a pathogen. Another part is mortality management. As part of our business, periodically, we will have mortalities, and how those are handled can also contribute to risks of disease entry into farms. Additional priorities for transportation include packing plant biocontainment. How do we keep the interface at the live animal and the packing plant side the best that we can so we're not transmitting potential pathogens? Looking at our truck wash efficiency, how can we improve upon our current systems or even identify novel and alternative systems to our traditional fixed truck washes? Again, all of these different priorities were listed for our Wean-to-Harvest program in a lot more comprehensive nature, but this covers the main priorities. So next slide. So what did we fund to date? So for our site projects, we have 13 different projects that are funded to date through various organizations and different investigators. But you can see some of the categories we are assessing is the effects of manure pumping and how that can affect pathogen spread and transmission. We're also looking at biocontainment of aerosolized pathogens, both by using electrostatic precipitation, as well as looking at how can we physically disrupt airflow by fan coverings. Other works included comparing and assessing bioexclusion practices in the industry, and are they associated with particular disease risks. Another project is looking at the cost of a disease outbreak within grow finish, and this is taken within the lens of what is the cost of actual diseases, and looking at this from both production and veterinary costs, but also trying to compare that against what are capital investments that are necessary to ensure proper biosecurity and disease prevention. Other projects include novel self-vaccination of pigs to reduce the need for sharing of crews between farms and sites, looking at automated power washers to reduce time and labor that's associated with washing of barns, evaluation of alternate mobile farm entry systems to replace static shower in and out systems, looking at biosecurity compliance monitoring and how we can provide feedback, but also looking at caretaker motivation and barriers to preventing biosecurity practices and compliance. And then lastly, assessing viral contamination of dead boxes and the risks that occur, plus mitigations. Next slide, please. For transportation, we funded a total of 9 projects to date, and again, spanning across different needs identified within our transportation sector. And so starting with alternative trailer cleaning methods, are there ways that we can quickly and effectively disinfect trailers, but also potentially reduce on some of the labor needs for that? and also being able to assess that without having to have a static facility. We also look at truck cab disinfection. That's always a challenge because there's a lot of porous surfaces within truck cabs. And so how can we provide a sanitary and clean area when drivers are going in and out of their trailer? We also assess truck sanitation status by utilization of different available technologies such as GPS and a clean trailer app to assess whether the sanitation of status of trailers and trucks is appropriate, but also to be able to track where those vehicles go and assure that they're in the right place at the right time. Other projects are looking at bioluminescence swabs, giving the truck wash facility people a way to objectively measure the cleanliness status of their trailers. And that is something that can be done right at the trailer locations. We've also assessed projects to reroute trucks and what the cost benefit of that could be, because if we can route vehicles differently away from high-risk areas, that could contribute to disease prevention and spread. We also looked at proportion of trailers that are required to actually reduce the risk of disease introduction and how many would need to be cleaned and disinfected over time to really truly have an impact on disease transmission. As I said, we've mentioned waterless mobile decontamination systems and assessment to have a novel methodology. And then also looking at what is the risk of contamination at the packing plant interface. Because again, all of our animals eventually go to market, and that is an area that's been identified as a high risk. And we need to understand what's the prevalence of disease, or at least trucks that have been contaminated, and then subsequently study what's the risk backwards onto the farm. Next slide, please. And so for any of our research information, especially for information from our Japanese encephalitis virus research, as well as Wean-to-Harvest, can be found at our website listed above at www.swinehealth.org. And this website contains not only our research reports, but our call for research proposals. We have other information such as disease monitoring reports. And then also there's a section that you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, which incorporates our disease monitoring reports, any articles on research outcomes, and much, much more information. Thank you. Turn it to Mark.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Mark?
Thank you. And good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to be with you today for this webinar and to share the thoughts and perspectives of a pork producer, a pig farmer, and the relationships and the partnerships with FFAR. Next slide, please. So a bit of background and history of Schwartz Farms, because I believe it mirrors that story and that history of many farming families, especially in pig production and pig farming. Schwartz Farms was founded by my brothers, raising corn and soybeans, and then diversified into pig production in the early 1990s, raised about 8,000 pigs a year with 3 employees. And so today, next slide, please, we've grown to a company of over 450 employees with marketing approximately 2.3 million pigs annually. And so it's grown in scope and size. And however, regardless of whether a pig production company raises 200 pigs a year or 2 million pigs a year, the focus and the core production, what's important in producing pigs is constant across those companies. Next slide, please. Schwartz Farms is based in southern Minnesota with operations in Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa, and 2 breeding herds in northeast Nebraska, or northeast Kansas, excuse me. Next slide, please. And so the industry has changed dramatically in the last 30 to 40 years from outside production, and cascade of photos on the left would be where I grew up on the second photo from the top, and how my dad raised pigs. And it's transformed or evolved to this industry with focus on productivity, efficiency, and sustainability. And regardless of production type, that focus on those is so important. It's an industry that you have to be focused on being competitive and a low-cost producer. That's the world we live in. And through that, continuing to produce wholesome, safe, and affordable pork, both domestically and worldwide. And key to this efficient production and sustainability is being able to minimize disease outbreaks, right? Prevent these introductions of new pathogens into our herds. Next slide, please. So the paradox of pig production in North America anyway is this, the pigs are raised where the corn is raised, where the corn is produced, and where the processing plants are, right? So it's the efficient model of using those resources, which is corn and for feed, and raising the pigs where those resources are. And herein lies the challenge, is that because pig production is concentrated, and in the evolution of multi-site production, a great number of pigs move daily and weekly across interstate, across state lines and across the Midwest and from the high plains to the Midwest. There's a vulnerability, right? And so in pig production, to quote Chesterton, we're all in the same boat and we're all seasick, right? We've got all our pigs in this area that makes us efficient, that also makes us vulnerable. Next slide, please. And so really the focus of this discussion, this webinar is, in 2013, in the U.S. pork industry had a real wake-up call with this introduction of this virus called PED, or porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. And we realized very rapidly that how rapidly this virus was detected across multiple states within a matter of weeks. And so with funding from the Pork Checkoff, which is funded by pig farmers, and the Pork Checkoff funds SHIC and has funded SHIC since its inception in 2015. So it's producer driven and producer funded. And in that is that value back to the pig farmers, to the pork producers, to be able to direct the research, direct those dollars to use research that can be used to enhance and protect the U.S. swine herd. So the partnerships form then with Pork Board funding SHIC, which is funded by the pork producers, and now the partnerships with FFAR allow those dollars from the pork producers to be leveraged to do work that'll help us remain competitive, remain productive pork producers on the world scale. Next slide, please. So specific to the projects that were mentioned by Megan and Lisa, the Wean-to-Harvest project specifically. So in that, I see the value in that, how we can take the research and the results of these projects, for example, in biosecurity, of bioexclusion, biocontainment, transport biosecurity. This is data driven, and it's typically research into our endemic viruses, for example, the porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus, or PED, as I mentioned. But that can be generalizable to the other pathogens for which we're at risk of these novel or emerging or transboundary or reportable viruses that could really paralyze our industry. And so we're able to take the data and the outcome of these research projects that we use, that is conducted typically with viruses in which we deal with now, learn from those and apply that not only to the current viruses, but also how do we prevent the spread of the next novel pathogen that's detected in a swine herd, and to be able to respond rapidly to that to prevent this from becoming endemic is one of the goals also. So really a perspective from a pork producer, that the value of these partnerships, the value of leveraging our dollars with that of the producers is so important to our industry. Next slide, please. So with that, I thank you on behalf of pig farmers, on behalf of all those people that care for the pigs and all the stakeholders of the swine industry.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was excellent. And thank you to Lisa and Megan for also describing a lot of our work together, our collaborative research work together. With that, I'm going to turn it back to our panel and ask you all some questions. So I'm going to stop my screen, and if you could all turn on your cameras, we're going to start the panel discussion period for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Excellent. Thank you all. So with our first question, it seems like a no-brainer, but why is research so important for the swine industry? Lisa, I know you talked a lot about the research impacts. Do you want to kick us off and get us started with answering this question?
Yes, thank you, Nikki. You know, I think as we look at any of the research, Mark hit the nail on the head. We are a data-driven industry, and having the ability to identify gaps and needs within our industry and then provide objective, science-based, and even economically vetted outcomes really help our producers, because our goal is to be able to address these needs and then develop a research program that can assess and address them and then deliver outcomes that can be taken into action on farm. And so having that collaborative effort really gives us that joint strength and breadth to answer some of these very complex questions.
Wonderful. And Mark, I was wondering if you could provide a producer to seeing about any field applicability or project value that you've heard of.
Well, definitely. And just to reiterate what Lisa mentioned, it has to be data driven in order to and vetted. Is it applicable? Is it feasible? Can it be applied in the field and scalable? So that's, I believe, the beauty of this central clearinghouse for research. Pork producers, pig farmers, we don't have the resources to conduct these, obviously. And so that's having that information brought to us, that from the ground up, that they're the working groups that approve these projects, they're the ones in the field that have an understanding of the value or the lack of value in a project. And once the results are known, how do we apply that? And so that's, I mean, the biosecurity, Wean-to-Harvest Biosecurity, those outcomes that will be forthcoming will allow us to either take on protocol or to not, right? If we find it's not effective, that we're not taking on processes that aren't effective, as valuable as taking on processes that do help us out.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. Moving to the next question. This has to do with our collaborative work. Both organizations were created and funded by other entities. With FFAR, it was Congress. With SHIC, it was National Pork Board, with the goal of stretching the initial investments through these funding partnerships. Additionally, SHIC and FFAR both independently fund swine research. Why do you each see the benefit, and what benefits do you see from working together? Jasmine, can you start this?
Yeah, absolutely, Nikki. And I would say, for us, collaboration is in our DNA. In fact, it is mandated from Congress when FFAR was initiated. So for every one of those congressional dollars that we are spending, we need to find a partner to match that with a non-federal dollar. So we're designing those partnerships for funding partnerships, but it's much more than that. I would also say from the scientific perspective, we're working with partners like SHIC to really help us support some of the technical expertise, helping us identify where there are needs in the industry, and really keeping their kind of finger on the pulse of what's needed in the sector. So again, we're designing those funding partnerships because it's mandated from Congress, but we're getting a lot more out of it in terms of our technical expertise, really being able to guide the design of the projects. So I would say it brings significant value to the work that we do, and we couldn't do the work without partners like SHIC.
Well said. And Megan, what are some of the benefits of partnership and collaborative work to SHIC?
Yeah, the partnerships that we formed with FFAR over the last several years have really just provided such a benefit to the pork industry. And I think one of the ways in which we see that is that SHIC is funded by the Pork Checkoff. Those are producer dollars that are a finite resource. we want to stretch the checkoff dollars that we receive to the greatest extent possible. And so being able to leverage each checkoff dollar with dollars that are federal funds allows us to not only increase the breadth of the research that we can do, it increases the number of projects, the dollar amounts that can be allocated towards research investments. And it also enhances the scientific network of individuals who are working on these emerging disease risks for swine. And so when you think about sort of the scientific network that we're each connected to, we see the partnership as really not only leveraging dollars, but leveraging the network so that more researchers, more institutions can look at these research and grant opportunities and say, my research could apply to the swine industry. My research could help the pork industry. And so we see that as a way to sort of leverage person resources too, researcher resources. And so any way that we can do that to help innovate for our pork producers and provide them with new tools and technologies, perhaps it could be crossed over from other livestock industries or agricultural engineering. You know, we want to look at how we can best innovate for the pork industry to reduce the emerging disease risk. And certainly this partnership is a big part of that.
Thank you. I know we already answered a bit of this question, but how do SHIC and FFAR envision these research takeaways transitioning to actionable change and impact within the field?
You know, I think we're trying to envision really the start to the finish of the process. And so we have a lot of producer involvement because, again, as Mark said, it's producer dollars that we're utilizing. And so we want to make sure we're developing a research program and having priorities that address specific producer needs, that we're asking for things that can be doable, and also asking for economic assessment. Because even if we do research and come out with a really great outcome, if it's neither doable nor economically feasible, those are things that we're really going to struggle to be able to have people do. So that's why it's so very important from the inception and the get-go to have producer involvement, producer-driven priorities, and producer-driven assessments and reviews of these different programs. And again, having that coordination with SHIC allows us not to only access our scientists and producers, but also to a whole other array of people that FFAR knows and that they have experience in doing similar things. So it really, again, exemplifies and expands our reach and coverage.
Thanks, Lisa. And can you elaborate a little bit on the working group nature of SHIC and how you choose the topics for for each priority area?
Sure. You know, we have our working groups are comprised of people, both producers, producer organizations, industry organizations, allied industry, as well as researchers and academics. And what we try to do is have a wide array of people that are assessing different protocols. So for example, in Wean to Finish, we're not only looking at producer on-farm issues, but we're looking at sociology of compliance for people. So we want to have folks that are familiar with that. We're looking at engineering of transportation. And so trying to get a wide breadth of people within our working groups that understand what this means or what things could be changed or researched to benefit producers is really important. And so we seek out folks within our industries and invite people to participate. We have heavy involvement from our board, but also from all of our swine industries. National Pork Producers, the Pork Checkoff, ourselves, and American Association of Swine Veterinarians. So it's a very comprehensive group that covers a wider range of expertise, but all designed to help guide our research priorities towards the end where we can have actionable outcomes.
Great, thanks. And you mentioned your board. Mark, you sit on SHIC's board of directors. Can you talk a little bit about your role on the board of directors and how the project to producer integration kind of conceptualizes? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned, SHIC was founded in 2015 in response to this transponder disease that caught us flat-footed, right? And so the pork producers through the leadership of the National Pork Board, said, we need an entity that will be able to be, rapid response and respond to the needs of the industry. Again, look at our mission statement. Every meeting, we look at our mission statement, say, how are we doing? Are we meeting our mission statement? Are we, what can we do better? And so it's, again, that, as a board member, you're constantly looking at that and say, these are producer dollars, and will they see value if they take a study out to the field and they're going to go, yes, that's what we need. And so it's just maintaining that direction and focus, and the leadership, Megan and Lisa, and are the ones that carry out the work, and the board is there to basically be the eyes and ears of the producers in our mission and carrying out our mission. So it's, again, to prevent, hopefully, the next introduction, but be able to respond quickly to protect our industry before the pathogen becomes endemic.
Wonderful segue to the next question. As we're talking about these emerging threats and challenges within the pork industry, both organizations, FFAR and SHIC, strive to be nimble and responsive in funding research to these emerging issues. Does working together hinder or help this quick response goal? Jasmine, I'll give it to you first.
Ben. So the quick answer is that this partnership and partnerships like the one with SHIC absolutely enable this quick response. But I do want to share that a producer once shared with me that everything happens at the speed of trust. And I think that is exactly hitting the nail on the head, that to enable these really quick responses, we have long-standing relationships with SHIC and similar partners, and we cultivate those over time to establish trust, communication, and SHIC does that with producers as well. And I would actually, in terms of the SHIC collaboration, Lisa Becton has been with FFAR in an advisory role for 8 years until she moved to SHIC. So again, these are long-standing relationships that we're investing in, that when there is an emerging threat, we're then able to leverage those relationships to respond quickly. So it's a quick response, but with a lot of time and effort invested in laying the groundwork.
Anything to add on SHIC's end?
Yeah, I think as I think about the benefits of the partnership, both organizations are fairly young, right? The FFAR is highlighting and celebrating the 10-year anniversary this year. SHIC is also fairly young, and that we're celebrating a decade of existence next year in 2025. And so I think the benefit to that is that both organizations, in my opinion, have been set up to be nimble and responsive and adaptive to industry needs, with a big communication component to both organizations' mission. Thinking about how do we hear from producers, hear from veterinarians, hear from researchers, but also communicate the outcomes of research and disease monitoring back to those stakeholder groups. And I think so naturally our organizations are well aligned to partner and to have very strategic elements of mission to come together and really, again, leverage dollars, leverage networks, and provide benefit to the U.S. industry.
Thank you so much. Agreed. With our last question, and I know we're running out of time, so hopefully we can answer it pretty quickly. What roles do producers and industry play in this research collaboration, and how is and will this collaboration help them in the long and short term? I'm open for anybody starting this question. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes. So no, again, to me, this is just the crux of the matter that we're discussing here, is that SHIC as a producer-funded and driven entity with a very singular goal, right? A singular mission, and again, I can't overemphasize the importance in the U.S. pork industry. We export 30% of our production, and so an introduction of a reportable disease would cripple the industry. And so the role, the goal of SHIC and the partnerships with FFAR would be to prevent such an event, and which would, not guarantee, but assure the long-term viability of the U.S. pork industry. That's really, I see as the whole mission and focus of SHIC, and therefore the partnerships with FFAR.
Thank you. Jasmine, can you answer this question as well from FFAR's perspective?
Yeah, and I would say my perspective is a little bit different than Mark coming from the funding side. We really look and feel like producers' needs should be guiding what we do, and we want to be responsive to producers. And so we host convening events and engage in these collaborative processes and partnerships with SHIC so that we really are hearing the producer voice and looking to be responsive to what is needed. And it's really our goal and our aim is to support research that, just as Mark was highlighting, that enables folks to sleep better at night because they feel like they have more resilient systems, that they have the tools that they need to address emerging disease threats or disease threats that are there on farm. So yeah, I think again, we're always looking to hear those voices and have that guide the research. And we're always really looking for our impact to help producers be more profitable, environmentally sustainable, and have healthier, higher welfare animals. And again, so everyone can sleep well at night is what I would say.
Thanks, Jasmine. And I'll let Megan or Lisa have the last word from SHIC's perspective.
Well, I think from all of us at SHIC, I think, I just want to say thank you for the partnership with FFAR. Thank you for the ability to stretch the checkoff dollars from producers with the federal funds. Ultimately, we're all here to help U.S. producers produce a safe food supply and to have healthier pigs on farm. And so, appreciate the opportunity to share this. And of course, to the audience, FFAR and SHIC are both organizations that want to hear from stakeholders. And so encourage your input and your feedback throughout the year so that our organizations can create the most value for producers.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all for answering these questions today. It was a really stimulating conversation, just showcasing not only our longstanding relationship and partnership, as Jasmine highlighted, but how we're going to continue to work together in order to address future challenges that impact our U.S. food system and the swine industry at large. So thank you again so much for your time today. Again, our speakers are Dr. Jasmine Bruno from FFAR. We have Dr. Megan Niederwerder from SHIC, Dr. Lisa Becton also from SHIC, and Mark Schwartz from Schwartz Farms, excuse me. I would also, from my last slide, like to conclude this webinar. Excuse me, I think it's not in presentation mode. With thanking you, our attendees, for attending our Minimizing the Impact of Emerging Disease Threats in Swine Through Research Funding Partnerships webinar. We are so excited that you were able to join us today. Again, this webinar was recorded and will be posted on FFAR's webpage. If you have any questions, I know we didn't have time to answer your questions today. We encourage you to email us on FFAR's end. You can reach us at swine@foundationfar.org. Or if you have any questions for SHIC, you can reach them at shic@swinehealth.org. Just to let you know, this is our 10th anniversary. This is a part of our 10th anniversary webinar series. All of those previous webinars and future content will be showcased on our webpage, foundationfar.org/impact. Also, SHIC has a monthly newsletter. So if you would like to keep in touch, you can sign up for their newsletter at the link below, swinehealth.org/newsletter sign up. And with that, thank you again for joining us today. We're grateful to our grantees, partnerships, and collaborators for supporting FFAR, and we look forward to continuing our work together in the coming years. And again, thank you to our speakers. With your key insights and collaborative research, we are able to support scientific research to better our animals, farmers, environment, and the pork industry. With that, I'm going to adjourn for today. Thanks again. My name is Nikki, and we'll see you next time.